think we are about ready to get started. So welcome everyone. I am Kristen Wyrick, our Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer and also Head of Global Talent Acquisition. And I am absolutely thrilled to welcome everyone to our Eyes on Inclusion webinar with a focus on transitioning to acceptance. This is an incredibly important topic. There's so many important topics in this area of diversity and inclusion, but this is a really important one, and it's one where I think everyone can benefit from greater understanding. I am looking forward to learning from our session today, as I'm sure everyone who's joining us today is as well. Before we get into it, I wanted to just take a couple moments to remind everyone about what is our diversity and inclusion vision at Alcon, and what are we all committing to around this space. And so just to remember and remind everyone, our vision is to help people see brilliantly. We need to see each other brilliantly. And so that means we are recognizing all of the different facets that make up every individual, and different facets is I think what is key in that sentence. And there's also 4 commitments that I want to remind everyone about, and this is a commitment that every leader and every associate is making at Alcon. And first is to honor and celebrate all dimensions of diversity. And I think it's really important that we recognize that it's not just honor and celebrate dimensions, it's all dimensions of diversity. That's what we expect of everyone. We also want to foster this culture of inclusion that is founded in mutual respect. So regardless of whether you agree or disagree with things, we have to recognize that we have to honor that culture of inclusion and make sure it's grounded in mutual respect, regardless of whether we agree or disagree. And then holding ourselves accountable. So we have to hold ourselves accountable to diversity representation at all levels and in all, once again, facets. And then finally, and this is another really important one, ensuring fair treatment, equal opportunity, and ensuring that everyone has the support that they need to succeed and grow. So I think I wanted to lead with those to just ground ourselves in what we deem important at Alcon. What we're going to learn today is all about ensuring all of those things here. And so without further ado, I want to recognize that we are thrilled to also be partnering with OWL. And I'm going to turn it over to Abby Marquardt to do a further introduction of our speaker.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kristen. I couldn't have said that better myself. And kudos to Alcon and the strides you're making internally to foster that diversity, inclusion, and also I love the accountability that you spoke of, because that's the key for long-term success, I believe. My name is Abby Marquardt. I am the immediate past president of OWL, Ophthalmic World Leaders. We are so thrilled to have this opportunity to learn, hopefully along with all of you out there, from Dr. Howe. Our mission at OWL is to advance diversity in leadership. And I think a program like this, it's our second opportunity, second annual program that we've been able to support Alcon and their open organization on. So again, thank you. And before we begin, I wanted to do, or let our viewers know a few housekeeping items today. We will be recording this conversation today. It will be on our OWL site, owlsite.org, for future viewing. And you will have the opportunity at any point today to send in your questions for Dr. Howe. So feel free to type those in at any point. We don't have to wait toward the end. And without further ado, I'd really like to introduce Dr. Vivienne Howe, MD, PhD. As you can see, this biography is incredible. Dr. Howe is currently the clinical assistant professor with Kaiser Permanente, the Bernard J. Tyson School of Medicine, and practices as a medical and surgical vitreoretinal specialist in Riverside, California. Some of her accolades here are just amazing, but I would like to hone in a little bit on, she is a member of AAO and ASRS and is co-chair of the ASRS Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. She is a mentor to underrepresented minorities and LGBTQIA+ students. And as a running guide for the blind, she has helped the visually impaired complete nearly a dozen marathons. I am just so thrilled to be here with you, Dr. Howe, and very much appreciate your time and efforts in this area. So without further ado, I just really like to kick off this conversation with you and really start to hone in on what has your experience been in our community here in ophthalmology.
Yes, well, first of all, thank you for that wonderful introduction. It really warms my heart to see what Al and Alcon and all those who are participating in today's call is doing, because it really says a lot about your statement on progressiveness, on diversity, on inclusion. It's such an important part of the fabric of our everyday lives, and it's just become that much more important. That's been brought about by recent events that has happened in the past, and you guys are not just playing a participant role in it, but you're playing an active role and highlighting folks like myself to ensure that our stories are being shared. You guys have a platform, you have the ability to reach out to lots of different folks, and so I appreciate you using that ability to really highlight and bring forth topics and issues that many folks may not know about or might be uncomfortable with. And so I'm so glad to partner with all of you to be a part of this. So thank you again for that. But so getting to your question, how has it been? I mean, I have to tell you.
Big question.
Yeah, the big question. Let's see, we have an hour, is that right? That's it? Okay.
We do.
How has it been? It's been amazing. It's been truly amazing. It's just to the point where it's like, why did I not transition sooner? Well, part of a lot of that is there's been a lot of changes throughout society and throughout history since I've been born. And, those are some things I can touch upon a little bit about, but overall, just to answer straightforward your question, it's been amazing. It's been eye-opening. It's been extremely comforting and supporting, and all the acceptance that I've received from everyone, coming from my family, friends, coming from my colleagues, has been great. Our fields are full of folks who are open-minded, who are educated, and who always want to better themselves. I mean, all of you work in ophthalmology, in retina, and many of you are retina specialists. And who are we? We're some of the most driven folks who are very academic and always want to better ourselves, looking for the latest treatments, looking for the latest studies. And part of that, I think, translates to who we are as a person. And not only is it academically, but it's in of ourselves, socially, how to be more responsible, how to be a better doctor to their patients, but also a better friend to all of our families and friends themselves. So it's been good. And I honestly cannot think of a single situation where it's been, at least to my face, negative. So that's how incredible it's been. And I would have thought that would have not been possible. My biggest fears about coming out and living my true authentic life was my own internal fears that I would not be accepted, that I could not, that people would look at me differently and I would have not the same opportunities. That I realized afterwards, by being truly true to myself and authentically, others have responded in ways I could have never imagined. So it's been amazing.
Yeah, and I think that leads into a great question I have for you in terms of being that true, authentic self. How has that affected your interactions with your colleagues and your patients? Could you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this question because a lot of what I had my own personal fears about was really how people would interact, and I made certain assumptions about other individuals. I practice in Southern California in an area called the Inland Empire, and the people here are great and wonderful and kind, but it's a very conservative area at the same time. And I assumed I might have some patients that might be uncomfortable with it, but truly, I did not experience one bit. If anything, some of those patients, which I was worried about, maybe that older gentleman who, who obviously is very conservative in terms of their attire and what they wear,
Mhm.
embraced me, took a point to say, you know, I, I think you're an amazing doctor, and whoever you are, being your true authentic self does not change that one bit. And if anything, my connection and relationship with them is even stronger. And I've noticed how that's become the case with even my friends and family. It's 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 been truly wonderful. I feel like in many ways, by being your true authentic self, people pick up on that. They see that, they are more comfortable with you, and they respect you more. I think it is often that we feel like being a little bit more open, being a little bit more vulnerable, that it is a sign of weakness. But I venture to argue that it is actually a sign of strength. And if you think about some of our greatest leaders that we've had over the history of time, they were open and tried to be authentic as possible and spoke with their minds because they spoke about what they truly believed in. You talk about somebody like Martin Luther King, who had such a beautiful vision for what he wanted to see, but he was true to himself and true to what he wanted, and people picked up on that. And other individuals throughout the history have spoken. Think about the the leaders in your life. It's not until that we reach that level where we can be true to ourselves and live ourselves authentically that others respect us more. And then so because of that, the relationships are so much more richer and so much more open, because now individuals are free to feel like they can share their own their own situations, and they're sharing me with their own individual experiences with their own family members and friends. Maybe they knew somebody who's recently transitioning or who's transgender, and they're coming to me to now for advice, and and the best thing I can say to all of them is that it's going to be okay, because I've dealt with it personally. But for all those reasons, I I just feel like the relationships are even greater, and it's opened up more doors to more opportunities, like being co-chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee at the ASRS.
Yeah. And this leads into, our community in eye health, for example. What can our industry do to help? You're obviously driving the conversation, but what could we do? What could the owls of the world, the Alcons of the world, our industry as a whole be doing to help this move forward? You have thoughts on that?
Right. There's certainly a lot of things that as in our own individual situations we can do to help the situation. I think probably the biggest thing that we can do is just to learn, to have an open mind, and to be aware, because once you have that open mind to learn, and you can move forward and take on different things that you were not aware of in the first place. I think a lot of things today we base upon certain assumptions, certain things that we were taught growing up. And the reality is, like everything in life, things change. We learn new things and we view things differently, just like in medicine as providers. And so having that open mind to seeing something different from a different perspective can be so so important. So really being open to see things and seeing it from the eyes of somebody else can make such a big difference. And so by doing that, then you'll be open to getting involved in other aspects where you can incorporate within your clinics or within your practice or within your organization. I recently had written an article for Retina Today in their Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion issue. And within it, I talk about 7 strategies that most clinics and corporations can involve in their organizations to make it stronger. And I think, first of all, it's just making that known that your organization not only just accepts but embraces diversity. It tells those employees within your company and or your patients or your colleagues that this is a place where they can be free and open. And then once you have that freedom, then I think you'll find that the discussions, that the ideas that will flow will be so much more richer. And so in terms of those 7 strategies, they include things. Is this what you wanted to have?
Yeah, absolutely.
So in terms of these 7 strategies, I talk about are 1, inclusive language, 2, diversity education, 3, inclusive policies, 4, clinic logistics, 5, recruiting and hiring, 6, inclusive benefits, and 7, workplace culture. And so if you'd like me to kind of jump into each one of those, I can talk some more.
I would love that.
So in terms of inclusive language, I know for many folks, including myself, I being of the Gen X generation, I'm not used to all these new pronouns that are coming out, they, them, and their. I grew up in a very binary black or white world where there was male and female and there was no in between. But stepping beyond that and realizing, just like in medicine, just like in biology, everything is along a spectrum. There's not just an XX and an XY. There's an XXX. There's an XXY. There's androgen insensitivity syndrome. There are intersex individuals who have both. I mean, it is just biologically fact that we live on a world of spectrum. And the same thing goes with sexual orientation, beyond just gender identity. So once we realize that, then we realize that maybe we need to be a little bit more open in our language, because it is not just so black or white. And so that's why allowing for maybe your electronic medical record system, allowing for, in some of your discussions and official company policy to include more inclusive language like them or their, or letting individuals to self-define themselves and not make certain assumptions about others. Just on a side note, the singular use of they is not something new. I know to many of us feels new. It feels kind of weird to use it because we've always used it in the plural sense. But the reality is they has been there from the very beginning. It's actually used in the King James Bible. It's been used by William Shakespeare in Hamlet. And it actually is widely accepted and recommended by the 2017 Associated Press Style Book. So if any of you are journalists, you would know that this is your Bible for journalistic writing, and it's something that's well accepted. So why not use it in our everyday care of our patients and also with our colleagues? It's been accepted throughout history. It's just now we're bringing it back and using more often. But the individual here is that we're using it to help those that it affects directly. Maybe we're uncomfortable with it. That's okay. That's normal. Anything that's new is a little uncomfortable. I was too. But imagine how that individual feels when you are using pronouns or language that is not inclusive. If they were, it just means so much more. And when people gender me with the correct way, it's truly an amazing thing that allows me to know that you are accepting that you truly want to support me. And then with that, we can move beyond. And so that's such an important part, I think, from the very beginning of any preparation or practice to use. And if you talk to many of you may have children, many of you have children in high school and college, you'll find that this is normal for them. It's unusual for us, Gen Xers, baby boomers, but for our college students, our high school students, you talk to them. When they introduce themselves to somebody else, they'll say, "Hi, my name is Vivienne Howe, And my pronouns are she, her, and hers. And believe it or not, they will be our future leaders. They will be our future providers. And that's what they're going to do. It's part of their generation. So it's incumbent upon us to learn from them. You know, being an attending at the Kaiser Permanente Bernard J. Tyson Medical School, I'm learning so much from the Gen Zers and the late millennials, because their view of the world is so different from ours. And it's my generation that needs to get on it and learn from them. You know, one other thing about it too is, so the AAMC has recently started doing surveys for the first, well, they've been doing this for years, but they started including questions that allow the first year matriculating medical students to self-identify as either as being LGBTQ, but they recently also include language or questions about gender identity. And the 2021 report, 1.2% of medical students self-identified as transgender or non-binary. That equates to nearly 250 medical students enrolling each year across the country if we have 20,000 medical students each year. And that's been almost a triple-fold increase compared to just 5 years ago. So ensuring that we have inclusive language today will ensure that our future doctors of tomorrow are going to feel comfortable, safe, and will want to join our practices, will want to join our organizations, will want to join our corporations and be future leaders. Because that way we can embrace that diversity. So that's the first. Number two is diversity of education. I mean, it's simple. You know, even our most woke leaders of our organization, there's so much that we don't know. You know, I co-chair of the DI group of the ASRS, but there's so much I don't know. I'm still learning, even though I'm openly trans, there's so much I don't know about my own community. And so having some sort of program, bringing in consultants, bringing in folks whose expertise is this area, just like what we do as retina specialists, we are the experts. And so the ophthalmologist brings us when we need them. So why aren't we doing that? I think it's often that we are a little bit arrogant in assuming because we're so smart, because we're retina specialists, that we can easily figure out by reading the latest and greatest on the internet or finding a book. But the reality is, unless you've lived that own lived experiences, you need to hear it from somebody who has that. And that goes not just for transgender individuals or non-binary, it goes the same with other individuals of maybe our underrepresented minority brothers and sisters, for instance. But that can play a role, but that education also needs to be done at all levels, not just at the level of leadership. Because in reality, some of the folks who need it the most are going to be some of our staff, because their level of education may be very limited compared to ours. And by having everybody participate and be involved, and them seeing the leaders who are learning this too alongside with them, maybe even being vulnerable a little bit and letting them know that I'm learning this stuff for the first time, just like you, side by side. It brings people together. It can be a bonding experience. And that way everybody's starting off at the same level. So that is two, diversity education. So I'll move on to three, but before I do, I know I've been talking for a while, so I just want to give Abby you an opportunity, or anybody else, just to ask any questions on those first two, or anything I've said already.
No, I think what I love about especially the diversity of education, Dr. Howe, is kind of goes back to what Kristen was mentioning at the beginning of this program, that fostering of an open culture, creating those educational experiences for not only the leaders, but back to your point, staff, people that may not have even been exposed or had the opportunity to sit on a webinar like this. So I think, you know, from a practice perspective or organizational perspective, that diversity of education is really, really important, but consistent too. It needs to be consistent and long-term.
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks for highlighting that aspect of what I said. It's such an important aspect of just being there, because you're part of the you're part of the discussion now when you use inclusive policies. When you don't use inclusive language, you are ostracizing those individuals without even realizing it. And being mindful of that can just greatly change people's perceptions. So the third thing I wanted to talk about was inclusive policies. Now, let me ask all of you this. When was the last time you actually looked at your employee handbook? And you know, maybe when you were first hired, who knows how many years ago, or even when you were just hired, did you actually read through it? Did you actually look at the section on you know, on language, on discrimination, on policies regarding that? And then, so if you have recently, how many of you can can honestly say there is something in there about sexual orientation or gender identity or gender expression? You know, I bet you many of you, it probably very severely needs to be updated. And so that's one of the important points, is that we need to make sure our policies are consistent and regularly updated. I mean, just as good business practice, these are policies changing of the times. The world moves on. Society is progressive. So you want to make sure your organization is progressive along with society itself. Otherwise, you're going to be left behind. And we all know examples of organizations that have been left behind because they were not willing to move along with the sign of the times. But looking at your policies, you know, just one quick example is just taking something really simple, and probably many of you probably don't think much about. But I can tell you, somebody like myself, it's on my mind almost every day, more so before I transitioned, was on professional attire. Let me just step back and ask you a question. Who thought of those policies? Is the definition of professional attire in the US going to be the same as in another country, who wear totally different attire for professionalism? No. So who defines it? It can be different in various situations. So why does it have to be so strict in the sense of men wear a tie, men wear a jacket, and women wear dresses? You know, it's just, the reality is people should be allowed and should be honored in terms of their own wishes, in terms of how they dress and how they view as professionalism. Now, of course, there's going to be certain examples which you need to create boundaries, and I'm not advocating for that, but certainly there needs to be the allowance for certain individuals, because everybody is free to find, you know, how they are and what they view as professionalism. And so this is something to think about, because when I was forced to wear a tie for my professional photo for my organization, when I hadn't worn a tie in the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, it was something that was very disconcerting to me. And for many of you, you don't think about that because it's okay if you're male, but if you define yourself as male, you identify as male. But there's a few of us that don't. And even some of us who identify as male are just not comfortable wearing a tie just in general. So, but yet they are some of the most professional individuals that you could know. So that's something to think about. And there's actually a lot of toolkits. There's links that we can share. You know, I mentioned my article earlier, but you know, maybe we can add some of those links onto the chat or something for individuals who want to see some guidance in terms of policies.
Yeah, definitely. Let's do that for sure.
Okay. The fourth thing I wanted to talk about was clinic logistics. So it says a lot when somebody walks into your clinic and they see a sign for just an all-gender restroom. So the traditional sense, yes, you have a male and female restroom, and especially in a public setting, then yes, obviously you're not going to have some co-ed all-gender if multiple people can use it at once. But if you happen to have a single-use restroom, then why does that have to be necessarily a just purely male or female? It can be an all-gender, and just having that alone for those who are trans or non-binary, or those who are just progressive in their thinking, says a lot about your organization and your ability to support folks like myself and for those who are looking for that support. You know, in the US Transgender Survey of 2015, the newest one's coming out here soon because they're doing it right now in 2022. They said that nearly a quarter, 25% of all transgender individuals who surveyed did not seek medical attention when they needed it in the previous year because they felt like they were not supported or potentially discriminated against and would rather live with their medical issues than go into the doctor's office. Think about it. This is one of the most vulnerable times in your life. When you go into the doctor's office, you're sharing some very personal information. And they need to know, you know, what you were assigned at birth, what your gender identity is, what medications you're taking, so it quickly comes out. And when you walk in, and if one of us walks into a place and something as simple as seeing like an all gender restroom sign can make such a big place because you're building an environment that is inclusive. It says a lot by your actions. We all say that action speaks louder than words. You know, we can say all these wonderful things that we're discussing right now, but unless you truly make those changes, company-wide changes, then we can see that progression and you really mean what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
So that's number 4, clinic logistics. Any questions about that or anything in the Q&A chat? Seems like a lot of good discussion here in the chat part.
Yeah.
Good. So with that said, then I guess we'll move on to number 5, recruiting and hiring. I mean, we as physicians, we're all about evidence-based medicine, right? We look at the latest studies, we look at the trials, we want to see the evidence. Is it statistically significant that this therapy is stronger than the other? And if it is, then we're willing to try it. We're willing to do it because it makes sense. We're scientific in the way we think. So why don't we apply that to other aspects beyond just science and medicine? What about social situations? What about evidence in terms of business practices? It has been well known and published and up and down that having a diverse group of colleagues, having a diverse board of directors translates to better business and success. Just look it up on the internet, it's all over the place. And so, you know, we've learned this about having more women incorporated within board directors and in leadership and in executive positions. We've learned this in terms of having a greater diversity of minorities, especially those who are underrepresented, having representation. And this also applies to those with different sexual orientation or gender identity. And so how do we attract these individuals? We do this by ensuring that our practices in terms of recruiting and hiring are effectively reaching out to those individuals. And we can add so much of our organization by having these people are part of it. You know, I'm fortunate. I work for Kaiser Permanente. They embrace and support my change, and in fact, they even celebrate it. And I can tell you with the ASRS, the American Society of Retina Specialists, who I was so afraid of coming out to because I thought my previous leadership positions would evaporate and go away. It's been the opposite. In fact, they asked me to consider running to be the co-chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. So organizations like this highlight and show how they know diversity can add so much to the overall organization, and you can do that too. And so think about certain hiring practices that can blind you to some of the certain unconscious biases that we have. You know, using name blinding software, you know, making a well-defined candidate profile before you hire or interview individuals, ensuring that you have multiple people involved within that interview process so you can have a diversity of thoughts and contribution that maybe one person who didn't think about but another person would, and having diverse individuals be involved in that hiring process. Because everybody has different lived experiences. Everybody has different priorities. But all that combined can only lead to a better situation. But something to think about. So, number 6, inclusive benefits. One of my biggest concerns that led to much consternation, yes, I use that term, consternation, proudly, is that when I was finishing fellowship, or even within fellowship, as I was questioning and trying to figure myself out, I would look at whatever insurance that was being provided for me and seeing if there was something there that would support me. Now, I was not looking for some surgery or something like that. I was looking for just some language in there that was open, that would allow LGBTQ supported physicians to identify themselves, to find doctors that may be familiar with transgender care and knew about transgender health, so I didn't have to teach them like I normally had to. It's having those benefits, knowing that if I were to work for your company, your organization, that I knew I would be supported because I knew your company cared about my own well-being. One of the latest buzz things that we all talk about in corporations, organizations today is about employee wellness, right? I mean, we hear about all the time. We have now wellness officers and everybody's involved. Part of that wellness is ensuring that your company supports your own health and well-being. And if you're not providing that within your benefits, then you're not providing all the wellness that you can. And there are many examples of companies that are doing this. Kaiser is certainly one of the leaders in the benefits that we're providing. But I can tell you, somebody like myself and other folks beyond myself would feel so much more comfortable working for your company if you had those inclusive benefits. And then finally, the last thing I discussed was workplace culture. So, many of you who on this call may have known me before I transitioned. And I kind of stood out because I had the ponytail. I was the one ponytailed retina specialist, but I was also active and involved. I helped start and found the Fellows in Training section of the American Society of Retina Specialists. So I played a role. I was on their board, and amongst other things, beyond just the ASRS, but within other organizations and also locally. So they knew me before, but they did not know anything about myself truly. So I was like a fly on the wall in many conversations that was very homophobic, that was very transphobic. And I can tell you, I know the individuals, I respect them today. They're some of even my closest friends, today. But at that time, they had no idea, so they felt comfortable in sharing some of those jokes, some of those comments. And I would just kind of nervously laugh along and be like, oh, okay, because my biggest fear was any of them finding out who I truly was. And so that led to my fear about coming out. It led to my fear about transitioning, because if these individuals could joke about something like this so easily, and everybody around them laugh about it so easily, how would they feel if I told them, by the way, I'm trans? My assumption, like many of you would probably assume, it probably would not go well. It wasn't until that I realized it doesn't matter, that I need to live my life to be a better person for those around me and not worry about what other people think. That was only until then that I was able to make that step and finally transition. And the great thing is, once I did, all those same individuals were some of the most welcoming and supportive folks in my life still to this day. But I don't blame them for it, but they just didn't realize how that can affect somebody like myself. So having a workplace culture that is open and supportive and aware, a little bit woke, can be a very important thing. Sorry, Abby, I cut you off.
No. I was just thinking about, the jokes and being in that type of environment. I always look at it as the reason I'm so interested in hearing your story and your viewpoints on this is to better educate myself and to understand where you're coming from a little bit more. And I think when I hear people telling jokes like that, I would hope, you know, a lot of that is just driven from absolute not understanding, right? Not being educated, not being aware. I would hope many of those jokes or comments, whatever the case may be, hopefully wasn't, you know, mean-spirited, but I think a lot of that type of behavior stems from fear and not understanding something that is different, whether that's a concept or a person. So I just love the fact that we're having this conversation today. So kind of a side note, but I think it's so important, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I love that point that you brought up. I mean, first and foremost, everybody who's on this call is obviously somebody who wants to learn, and you know, all of us are probably guilty at one point or another about making some sort of comment or joke, or even just laughing and being a bystander along with some of these comments, and I myself included, you know. But it wasn't until as I go through this journey and meeting others like myself that I realized like how it can really affect others in their own personal well-being, and could even lead to things like, you know, depression and worse. But as we grow as a society, as we become more progressive and we learn how to better ourselves, because, you know, we're in the business of building relationships with others. I mean, that's the whole point of being a doctor. You build these patient-doctor relationships, or you know, in business, it's these connections that you have with these individuals. You know, these relationships. It's being more aware and respect of one another that we then get to the next level.
I agree 100%. And I just have kind of, before we get into audience questions, Dr. Howe, I would love just if there was one piece of advice that you would want to give out there today, based on your experiences, based on your transition, what would that be for our audience? And maybe people that aren't on the line right now. You know, is there a nugget you'd want to leave with us?
Oh, that's such a powerful question. There's so many different ways you can go along with this and what you can answer, but I think really, yeah.
Or maybe it's, you know, just from the discussion today, what would be a key takeaway, you know, that you would want people, there's one thing that you would want people to take away, what would that be?
I think here's the thing. Let me ask, I'll answer the question, but let me ask you a question, okay? Let me ask, why do you do what you do? Why do you do these interviews? Why do you have these sessions? What is the primary goal and purpose of what you do?
Oh, I think at the very core of it,
yes,
I despise bullying. I despise people that are less fortunate, and not having the power to fight back. And I think that's really been called out in the last 2 or 3 years, but I've always been that way since I was little. So any way that I can help improve your situation, or those that are not as privileged, or have really fought their whole life to be their authentic self and had these challenges, I try to do what I can. OWL as an organization, we really hone in on our networking and our education. And I think, you know, advancing diversity and leadership is our mission. But I think it goes beyond. I think you commented earlier on leadership. You know, you've got to start this before that. You've got to start earlier. And I think, to your point, the younger generation is doing a great job. But I think it's up to me and you and Gen Xers and baby boomers to start embracing. And that's where we can really, I think, open up a whole new world for people, you know, and create more kindness and respect of others.
Yes,
so long answer. But
No, is that exactly what I wanted to hear. Because the way you're doing this ultimately is through connecting people. That the whole OWL organization is through connections, right? You're connecting people from all sort of different levels to come together to build something even greater. And that's what you're doing today. You're connecting all of us who is on this call with somebody like me, providing a platform for me to share a little bit my story, a little bit of what I've experienced. But in the very essence of what we're doing is connection. And and that is what I want people to get from this meeting, is that in essence of who we are as humans, we are a social species, and what we want in life is to just connect with people, because that's what gives us a sense of purpose. That's what gives us a sense of just well-being. Because those of us in society who don't have that connection, those are the people who unfortunately are the ones who are left behind. Those are the people who are bullied. Those are the people who are depressed. Those are the people who, even worse, consider suicide. Those are the people who are left out. But when we connect with them, they feel like they're included. They feel like they're accepted. Then that's when we can change the whole equation in the situation. So we make it better for them. It's what we do every day as a physician. We connect with our patients. We can fix their medical problem. We can show their pictures and say it looks wonderful, but that's really for our own ego. But when we truly connect with a patient and they're appreciative of what we've done, even though we really didn't improve their vision at all, or maybe the things we tried maybe even led to a situation which certainly not both of us had wanted, but we connected them within a way because they knew we were there to try to help them. That's when that relationship, that's when that situation becomes so much greater. And so to bring it to somebody like myself, why am I doing this? Why am I here? Is connecting with all of you who are on this call to let you know somebody like myself. It's very difficult to change people's minds, perceptions about individuals by throwing at them logic and reason. As a scientist, as a physician, it's that's what we're taught to do. But as all too often we see in these discussions and politicians and all these talking heads on the internet, they're just throwing all this, trying to make their cases, but they're not connecting. And the way we connect that is through sharing our stories, sharing ourselves, being a little bit vulnerable, and making people realize that I'm no different from anyone else here. I'm just like you. I'm just like your loved ones, just like your friends. So why view me differently? I'm just a person who just wants to connect with you in an amazing way. And so if you look at any one of us who is trans or non-binary, or anybody who is a minority that is being left behind, all we ultimately in the end just want to be connected and be a part of your story, be part of society. And so that's what I hope people get from all of this. And so Abby, thank you to you and Al and Alcon for allowing us to have this ability to connect with one another.
Oh, no, it's been a privilege and an honor, Dr. Howe. It's been so nice to get to know you, and I hope our audience has really enjoyed this conversation. I have. I've learned a tremendous amount in this short amount of time, so thank you. I want to see if we have any questions that we can get to quickly here. I know we're getting on towards the hour, as we knew we would.
We do have a couple of questions from the chat, and I'll start with this one. During your patient interactions, do you and your staff share your pronouns? And how often do patients respond with sharing their pronouns?
So it depends on the generation. But one thing at Kaiser Permanente, we are rolling out the ability to put our pronouns on our badges. So on our medical badges, we can put down our self-identified pronouns. Just on a side note, just remember, these are pronouns that we identify for ourselves, that this is who we are. It's not our choice, it's who we identify, it's just simply who we are. And so by allowing That to also be a part of our patients as well. So in our EMR, there is a section that actually says what pronouns they identify as, and we are aware of that when the patient checks in. So we make sure that we respond by that way. Do I every day, if I meet a new patient, do I walk in there and say, hi, my name is Vivian Howe, and I use the pronouns she, her, and hers? Honestly, I don't. You know, a baby boomer might be like, what's going on here? Especially in an empire. Although I love them great, but it's going to be different for them. But to the younger generations, oh yeah, every time, you know, it's just a part of what it is. And for those of my colleagues on this call who teach at medical schools, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's just a normal thing. And this is going to become more and more of the norm.
Thank you. And there was one other question too that I think we have mostly answered, but somebody was asking about inclusive policies and if there were examples of inclusive policies that we could adapt or make sure are in our policies. And we do have some resources that we are sharing. Are there examples of written policies within there?
Yeah, there actually is. So in that Retina Today article, there's actually some links to some wonderful, well thought out inclusive policies that could definitely help like a human resource manager look at it and adopt. So the whole point is all this stuff doesn't need to be reinvented. We don't need to figure out themselves. There are links like through the Human Rights Campaign or GLAAD. These organizations have put out some really great work and some great information there that you can model your organization with.
Thank you.
We're almost at the top of the hour. So Dr. Howe, again, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today and your knowledge and wisdom. I'd also like to thank Alcon and the Open organization for their partnership with OWL. And particularly to Kristen Wyrick, Tyler Snyder, and Nishant Mahler for all of your work in pulling this program together. Sincere thanks to everyone who took time out of their day today to join us and log in and learn. We can all be allies to diversity and inclusion. Please check your inboxes soon for a link to the recording from today's webinar, and we'd encourage you to share this with your friends and colleagues. We also will be including all of the resources we've been mentioning for further reading. And we would also like to include a brief survey, and we'd be really grateful if you could complete that, and help us continue to improve. Thank you all again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
And I have shared that link to the survey in the chat, so you can grab that right now and open it up before you run, or it will also be in the email.
Perfect.
Oh yeah,
I live by my inbox.
Yeah, this is great. You guys put this all together like while I was talking. This slide here with all these links. But that's fantastic. If there's anything, I just want to just add one last thing. I mean, for all of you who are on this call, you can all say now, you know, somebody who's transgender or who's non-binary, because there's not very many of us I know out there who are open. And I hope you learned a few things just from hearing my story, and that right now it's a very turbulent time for folks like myself, you know, especially in terms of politically, but I think there's a lot of myths and misunderstanding. And so I hope all of you take a little bit of what you've learned today from knowing somebody like me and realizing I'm no different from any of you, and that you will share with your friends and colleagues that we're just trying to just connect with everybody else. We're not trying to do anything else beyond that, just like any one of us every day. So thank you again. Thank you, Alcon. Thank you, Al. Thank you to everyone being part of this phone call, for being such wonderful allies, being wonderful supporters. And I know the world will be a better place because of the efforts of all of you who are on this call and organizers. Thank you.